Someone left a button up at the front. It says, history majors get more dates. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about F. Scott Fitzgerald and the Roaring Twenties. This is going to be, I hope, a lot more optimistic. We're looking at, in this part of the course, a variety of reactions to the First World War and the loss of faith that accompanied it. And as we've seen, they vary in a variety of ways. Yeats is afraid of what's coming next. He basically sees this as a death of a civilization and doesn't know what's in store for us all. He sees it as largely beyond his control, as a matter of huge historical cycles. Calvin Coolidge is optimistic. He thinks that with the right sort of response and returning to normalcy and trying to get government out of the way in particular, that people are going to be able to thrive by themselves. A variety of other people have different reactions. T.S. Eliot sees himself as really just picking up the fragments of a shattered civilization. Well, like Coolidge, F. Scott Fitzgerald has a somewhat more positive view of all of this, thinking of the United States as positioned to actually do something dramatic and wonderful in response to the war. Not wonderful in the sense of, oh, everything's perfect now, as we'll see, it's far from that, but instead looking at a situation where you might say the field is wide open. At one point, Nietzsche, when he says, look, God is dead, all of the old values are gone, he says there's a freedom that we now have to redefine things. What is required? That we view everything afresh, that we reevaluate values. And so that chance of beginning again is something that is a theme in Fitzgerald. There's a new opportunity for a new start. F. Scott Fitzgerald himself was famous almost immediately. What we read for today is part of his first novel, This Side of Paradise. It made him famous very, very quickly. It sold about 49,000 copies and went into several printings. It describes a number of his romances, including one with a character modeled on his real-life wife-to-be, Zelda. Zelda broke up with him because she thought he was a good-for-nothing who was going nowhere. It was the success of this novel that actually impressed her and got her to agree to marry him. So that was part of his motivation in writing the novel, to impress this girl. But it impressed not only her, but lots of other people. It immediately established him as a major literary figure in the United States. He began not making so much from this. He made about $6,000 from this novel altogether. But it enabled him to put himself on the map and command much higher pay for other things. After writing a series of very famous novels, including The Great Gatsby, he ended up going to Hollywood and working in Hollywood. So here you see him going over some scenes, basically. And here are some of his most famous novels: This Side of Paradise, 1920, The Beautiful and the Damned, 1922. But 3 years after that, The Great Gatsby, then Tender is the Night, and finally The Last Tycoon. After that, it was mostly screenplays in Hollywood. F. Scott Fitzgerald, however, as you can see, started off with a tremendous novel, a great novel, every 2 to 3 years, and then all of a sudden slows down, partly due to the fact that he was getting Hollywood and other kind of work, partly due to the fact that he was just famous and constantly being interviewed and sought after for various engagements, but partly it was a matter of his battle with alcohol, which consumed much of the later part of his life. There is a bar dedicated to him in Paris, which is, well, looks like that. As you can see, he did become a popular figure. Here he is on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. Well, This Side of Paradise is a coming-of-age novel. It is a novel about growing up. And in his case, really not only his growing up, though it's primarily about that, but a lot of people read it and immediately responded to it, thinking it was about America growing up. It modeled their own experiences. And indeed, lots of students in this class have read this novel and have found a lot in it to identify with. Amory Blaine is the main character. He goes to a boarding school, and then he goes to Princeton, though he's from the Midwest. Then he goes to war, and finally goes back to Princeton. Very little is said in the novel about his war experiences. In fact, in the actual case of Fitzgerald's life, he was drafted, went into the Army, but never got closer to the fighting than Long Island. And Amory Blaine, it turns out, like Fitzgerald, was a bayonet instructor. Anyway, throughout the course of the novel, he loses one character after another. His mother dies, his mentor, Monsignor Darcy, dies, several friends die, one disappears. He just leaves Princeton, nobody ever knows what happened to him. The girl he loves dumps him to marry a rich man she doesn't love. That's the Zelda character. And then another girl turns out to be crazy. There's an infatuation, and in a dramatic scene in the novel, the two of them are horseback riding. And she decides it would be fun to sort of play a game of chicken and race her horse toward a cliff. Well, Fitzgerald, Avery Blaine is on another horse. He steers away from this. He thinks this is crazy. She gets very close to the cliff and then jumps off the horse. The horse ends up going over the cliff and dying. The girl survives, but he dumps her thinking she's a lunatic. And the reader tends to agree with that. In any event, it's a story about growing up, about gaining experience, gaining a kind of wisdom, if you will, though how wise he is at the end is unclear. Fitzgerald wrote to his publisher that the title, This Side of Paradise, comes from lines of Rupert Brooks. Well, this side of paradise, there's little comfort in the wise. And if you think about that for a moment, you realize that's a rather ambiguous statement. There's little comfort in the wise, meaning, well, what exactly? What does that mean? Be brave.
Knowledge sucks.
Knowledge sucks. Okay, that's a way of putting it rather bluntly. But yeah, I mean, being wise doesn't do you much good, is one way of looking at it. Is there anything else it could mean? Say it again. Ignorance might be bliss. Yeah, so to a large extent, his growing up is not a pleasant experience. And as we'll see, it involves what he himself views as a kind of corruption, a loss of innocence, something that leaves him in a place that is not entirely satisfying. So he ends up feeling like I've gained in wisdom, but it's not a great thing. And here is another epigraph from Oscar Wilde. Experience is the name so many people give to their mistakes. And so he gains experience, but really it's a record of his mistakes. So he himself is a funny kind of hero. Not exactly the classic kind of hero of the novel. He ends up gaining wisdom, yes, but ends up in a position where he's not sure what he's gained, what he actually knows, ends up thinking maybe really all of this is just a series of mistakes. Anyway, there are a number of issues that emerge in the course of the novel. Here's one of them. He's talking about war. He and his friends, in fact, for most of the parts of the novel that we did not read, it consists of him and his friends sitting around in rooms at Princeton talking about various issues and various authors and so on. It's very talky. I don't know how, I didn't know what you'd think of that, and so I thought you'll never get to the good part and you'll give up on it. And I mean, it depends. Do you like action movies, or do you like movies where people sit around and talk? I mean, yeah, I don't know. My friend Roy, he loves action movies. One of my favorite movies is My Dinner with Andre, where people just sit around and talk philosophy in a cafe. Oh, and at one point, somebody else comes, and a couple of other friends show up, they talk for a few minutes, and then they leave. It's like, wow, it's awesome from my point of view. Another favorite of mine is Metropolitan, where a bunch of people sit around and talk pretentiously. And I thought, this is just like the people I knew in college. Well, anyway, most of the novel is really like that until near the end. So, and then it doesn't get a lot better. Then he's sitting in somebody's car talking to the message station. So anyway, but yes, I get to the end of all the logic about non-resistance. At this point, he and his friends are debating World War I, debating pacifism, whether it's ever legitimate to use violence. And he says they're like an excluded middle, stands the huge specter of man as he is and always will be. Now, what is excluded middle? There is something in logic called the law of the excluded middle. What does it mean? Does anybody have any familiarity with that term? It's really just P or not P. It's raining or it's not raining. Okay, it's related to a principle of bivalence that says every proposition is either true or false. And so it's saying, look, the answer is yes or no. True, false. There's no in between. The excluded middle, in other words, is there's nothing in between yes and no, in between true and false. And so he's feeling that sense. Look, I'm torn in these two directions, and there's no third way. And he says the specter, here the issue of whether violence is ever justified, because it seems, I mean, here's his problem. It looks like violence is always bad. And yet, sometimes it seems like the alternative to violence is even worse. And so he's thinking violence, avoiding violence, they're both bad. He wants a third way. He wants some other solution, and there isn't any other solution. And here he says, the specter stands right beside the one logical necessity of Tolstoy's and the other logical necessity of Nietzsche's. Now, we haven't read Tolstoy, but we've read Dostoevsky. And I think in this respect, he has in mind a similar theme in the two authors. what is this alternative? Dostoevsky, let's say, or Nietzsche. What's the difference? I mean, what is the issue that he has in mind? What is
fighting for?
Say it again?
Depends what you're fighting for, either yourself or something outside of yourself.
Oh, good. Okay, as Dostoevsky frames it, yes, you're fighting for either yourself or something outside of yourself. And so Nietzsche represents which of those two? The self, right? I'm out for myself. In the end, I have to become the person I am. That's the key thing. I have to redefine values, and how do I do it? If I can no longer trust the things outside of me, I can no longer trust tradition, I can no longer trust religion, there's nothing but me to go on. I've got to decide what I value. And so Nietzsche says we have to reevaluate everything afresh, and in the end, the only source I have is myself. I have to become the person I am. The only thing that can be a sort of lodestar that I can follow here is authenticity, being true to myself. And Dostoevsky goes for the other side and says, no, it's something outside of me. Really, if it's nothing but me that is defining value, I'm a narcissist. I'm just like the person from the myth looking into the pool at myself. Really, value comes from outside. From God, Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, I think, but really, at least from something outside of me, from other people, from mankind at large, from God, from nature, from something outside and larger than myself. And so that's really the issue he has in mind. And when he talks about the logical necessity here, he's feeling the power of Nietzsche's argument. That, look, in the end, I have to evaluate things myself. I have to think critically about what people are telling me. I can't just accept things on the basis of authority. I've got to think it through. But what do I have in thinking it through but myself to act as a judge? And he sees the power of that argument. But then he turns and looks at Tolstoy or Dostoevsky and sees the power of the alternative. In the end, that's just a way of taking anything that's going on in me and validating it and acting as if it has some kind of cosmic significance. He says, that's not right. If there's such a thing as right and wrong, good and bad, justice and injustice, it has to be something that's coming from something larger than me. And so he sees the power of both, and again, would love to have a third way out, but doesn't see how it's possible. That's in a way the question that he's grappling with near the end of the novel. What is it to be right and wrong? What is it for things to be good or bad? What can serve as a foundation for value? We've got these norms we've described at the level of the manifest image. We can't find a foundation for them in science. We either have to find a foundation for them in ourselves or in something else higher than ourselves, something bigger than ourselves. And how do we do it? But he says, look, if maybe here would be a way. If only we could learn to look on evil as evil, whether it's clothed in filth or monotony or magnificence. So here's a strategy for trying to understand, for example, what's good, how to live. Think about what's to be avoided. Think about what's really bad. Often people will disagree about the positive things, but might agree about the negative things. People might disagree about their favorite foods, for example, but they might all agree that certain things are disgusting and not to be eaten. And so you might think, maybe we could get a start by saying, all right, forget our conceptions of the good. Maybe we have very different ideas there, but what about evil? Maybe if we could just recognize evil, no matter what guise it was wearing, and see evil as evil, we'd be able to do something. Now, at that point, he's about to go off to war. And so far, he hasn't really encountered any evil as such. He's just thinking, well, we're leaving. There's this beautiful scene where he's about to leave Princeton. He's on the Princeton campus for the last time before going off to war. It's at night. It's a very beautiful scene. But anyway, he says, what we leave here is more than this class. It's the whole heritage of youth. We're just one generation. We're breaking all the links that seem to bind us here. So all of a sudden, he's been drafted. He's been called up to war. He's looking at this beautiful campus. And I don't know if you've ever been to Princeton, but it is beautiful. And it's in this area, it's a small town, it looks kind of rural. And he's looking around this as it's lit up at night. And he says, this is beautiful. And yet, leaving this and going off to war, going off to fight, going off to face fire. He says, look, I'm not just leaving Princeton behind. I'm leaving my whole youth behind. Imagine that you got drafted, and suddenly we're being sent, possibly, far away, and you're looking at UT the last time before you leave. I mean, it's a very powerful image, and it feels like I'm just leaving my youth behind, not just this particular place. And then the question is, well, what survives this? what is constant among all of these things? He begins reflecting on change in general. And he says, here, Heraclitus, did you find in fire and shifting things? Well, let's stop right there. Who is Heraclitus? He's one of the earliest Greek philosophers. The very first Greek philosopher was Thales. Thales had the remarkable view that everything is water. The story is he was a well digger. And, you hire Thales. He says, I can dig you a well, no problem. Well, how do you know you'll hit water? Don't worry, deep down everything is water. That's actually thought to be true. That's not just a stupid philosophy joke. He was a well digger, and he did have the view that in the end everything was water. Now, he raises an important question there. What is the world made out of? And he proposes an answer that we now think of as very naive. Nevertheless, it's a good question. He's maybe the first person in Western thought to say, what is all this stuff made of, ultimately? And he proposes an answer. Well, Heraclitus is a philosopher who follows him just a little later and says, actually, when you look at the world, you see just constant change. There is no continuity. There is nothing that really persists over time. And so Heraclitus is famous for saying, you can't put your foot into the same river twice. Why? Because, well, the water is changing. It's a different bit of water you're putting your foot into, and so it's, in some sense, a different thing you're putting your foot into. For that matter, your foot has changed. And so your foot is different. You are different. So it's not just you can't put your foot in the same river twice because the river's changed. You've changed too. Everything is constantly changing. And he begins to think that, and he says, wow, I'm losing all of this stuff. It looks like my life is changing in so many ways all at once. Maybe everything just deep down has changed. Does anything persist? He says, in all of that, you found the prophecy hurled down through the dead years. This midnight, my desire will see shadowed among the embers, furled in flame, the splendor and the sadness of the world. So you see an image here of the world as splendid, but it's also sad. Tell me about this image. Why does he feel this? What's going on inside of Amory Blaine's head? It's a hard question. And he's thinking, here's at least the way I think about this. He's seeing his own life change. And he's thinking, is there anything that is constant in all of this? He's asking Heraclitus' question. Is there anything that's constant? And in particular, he's asking who he is. And is there anything constant in him? He looks around at a world that seems to be changing dramatically. And notes, shadowed among the embers of a dying fire. He's looking at something that's sort of dying, that's sort of fading away. And it's not just Princeton, but this particular fire that's there. And so there's the beauty of the flame, the beauty of its sort of vibrancy, and yet it's dying out. We're seeing embers. He's seeing this as collapsing. He sees that as a beautiful thing. A world of constant change is both a beautiful thing and yet a deeply sad thing, because there's nothing permanent to hold on to. And he's looking for that. Is there anything in the world, is there anything inside himself that he can really hold on to and count on and treat as permanent? And so far, he doesn't really have an answer. Now let me ask you that question. Is there anything in your life that you treat as permanent? Anything about the world, or anything about you that you can say, yeah, that's me, that's who I am. And I'm sure that will continue to be me 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now.
My height.
Your height. Okay, there's something, right? Yeah, you're this tall, you've stopped growing, and so you might say, yeah, that's pretty much what it is, And it will stay the same until you get to be, well, luckily a little older than me, when you'll start shrinking back down. My father used to be way taller than I am. Now he's a little shorter than I am. And that's a little scary. And it's not because I've grown. It's because he's shrunk. And so, yeah, but yes, that's something that's pretty constant over a long period of time. What else? Say it again. My name. Your name. Oh, yeah, your name is something that will remain constant, or at least probably will. Maybe not. You might change your name. Maybe you'll get married and change your name. Or maybe you will just decide to change it. There have been times when I thought, yeah, Bonneback is hard to say. Actually, when I was a kid in my first grade class changed his name. His name was Turbevich. And that was hard to say. There were hardly any vowels in it. And so the next year he came back to school and his name was Thor. So he went from this little Slavic kid to a Norse god. Just by leaning off the left half of it. Well, in any event, yeah, there are a few things that remain constant. You could say, what about me? What about my personality is going to remain constant? What is a characteristic of me that I'm sure will also be true of me 40 years from now?
Your sense of humor.
Your sense of humor. All right, that's not a bad candidate. You might think your sense of humor is something that is a pretty permanent feature of you. Some people will laugh at almost anything. Other people will laugh at hardly anything. Some people laugh at my jokes. A lot of people don't. In fact, it was sad. I was going through comments on these videos on YouTube today. I realized that in all the years I've been posting them there, I never knew how to approve a comment. And so today I actually figured it out. There were hundreds waiting for me. But one person said, ha ha ha, these jokes are not funny at all. And I thought, oh, so I didn't approve that one. I hate you too. But all right, yeah, I mean, maybe that is a constant, but it's hard to find things like that you can be sure in advance are going to be part of really who you are in a permanent way. Well, in the final chapter of the book, he begins reflecting about a loss of faith. A loss of faith, in this case, of the people he refers to as the heirs of progress. Now here, how broadly he intends that, I'm not sure. He sees he and his companions as the heirs of progress. Partly, they're at Princeton. And back then, it's still, I guess, sort of true. But back then, to go to a school like Princeton, you had to be quite wealthy. It's much less true today. Now it's more a matter of merit going to Ivy League schools. And that's been true ever since, say, the 60s. But before that, it was largely a matter of wealth. And so, to some extent, these are the heirs of progress because all of these guys at Princeton are pretty wealthy. But it's not just that. I think he sees his entire generation as an heir to progress. Really, the progress of the past 100 or 200 years has put them in a very enviable position. In an affluent society, poised to take advantage of all of these things. And nevertheless, they lose faith. Nevertheless, they find themselves lost. And here is partly why. He senses a moral drift within himself. At least that's what he calls it. And here is a little question and answer thing that he's conducting in his own head. So this is Amory Blaine talking to himself. Where are you drifting? Don't ask me. Don't you care? Rather, I don't want to commit moral suicide. Have you no interests left? None. I've no more virtue to lose. Just as a cooling pot gives off heat, so all through youth and adolescence we give off calories of virtue. That's what's called ingenuousness. And so he says, basically, yeah, growing up involves losing these bits of virtue. Are you corrupt? I think so. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about good and evil at all anymore. And so he no longer has a real moral compass. He has no longer a sense of who he ought to be, much less who he is. And in one beautiful passage he says, I don't want to repeat my innocence. I want the pleasure of losing it again. And so he feels as if he's been giving off these calories of virtue, that he's lost a certain amount of innocence in going through all of this. Having these love affairs, having somebody you thought of as a close friend then dies, and he feels this sense of loss. He feels this uncertainty about who he is or who he ought to be. He is not sure really where his whole generation has a place in this society. It's changing so rapidly, he's not sure that there's anything that will remain constant. He says, don't get me wrong, I'm not nostalgic. I'm not thinking, oh, if only I could go back and not have lost my innocence. He basically says, I wish I could go back and repeat the pleasures of losing it again, but it's not to look back. He wants to look forward. The problem is he's not sure which direction to go. And here's the way he puts his crisis. There were no more heroes. There were no more wise men. There were no more heroes. Bert Holiday was sunk from sight as though he had never lived. That's the guy who just disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to him. Monsignor was dead. Amory had grown up to 1,000 books, 1,000 lies. He had listened eagerly to people who pretended to know who knew nothing. So he's in a position of looking around and saying, all these people I respected, all of these people I thought of as close to me, they're either gone or, well, I can't look up to them in the same way any longer. There are no more heroes. And so I don't know where to look. It reminds me of a George Benson song, where he's saying, in the end, I have to look to myself. There's nobody I can find as a hero. And it's a similar thing here. I had grown up to 1,000 books, but now he sees them all as 1,000 lies, as if none of those things can be trusted. And so all of the old values, all of the people he had respected as upholding those old values, no longer have that role. And so here's the way he feels about everything. Life, he says, was a damned muddle, a football game. with everyone offside and the referee gotten rid of. Gosh, it sounds like the game against OSU. Everyone claiming the referee would have been on his side. No, actually, this is better than the OSU. But yes, he basically says, life is like that. I mean, there's no referee, there's no rules that I can actually look up to, nobody whose authority I respect. It seems like everybody's offside. Everybody's giving off these calories of virtue. They're all of a sudden staying corrupt. Nobody knows what the rules are. Everybody claims the referee would be on his side. And so we've got this cacophony of people saying, yeah, my way, I'm right. And he looks around and says, I don't have any way of judging. I can't find any source outside of me. That's the problem with the Dostoevsky-Tolstoy view. But neither can I trust myself. And so that's the problem with the Nietzschean view. He doesn't see a solution. Now, the romantic elf. There is something romantic about this novel, because it's not only this angst-filled growing up story, but also he does find something in the end. He says he found something that he wanted, that he had always wanted and always would want. Not to be admired as he had feared. That was his concern for a while. He just thought, I want other people to think well of me, and he thought that's pretty superficial. It's not a question of what I want to be, it's a question of how I want to seem to other people. And he thought that's no way to be, that's no real goal to have. He said not to be loved, as he had made himself believe, but to be necessary to people, to be indispensable. And so he begins to think, wait a minute, maybe there is some foundation, some third way, some way of solving this problem. And now we get something that Fitzgerald uses, in fact, well, taking over from James Joyce. The idea of an epiphany, a sudden realization, this sudden insight, this sudden bit of truth that shines through the character. And so he says, life opened up in one of its amazing bursts of radiance. And Amory suddenly and permanently rejected an old epigram that had been playing listlessly in his mind. Very few things matter, and nothing matters very much. On the contrary, Amory felt an immense desire to give people a sense of security. So all of a sudden he says, it's in service to others. Maybe in service to others, I actually can find some foundation for value. It's not just inside myself, that's a dead end, that leads to narcissists, but it's also not in something outside of me that I can place my trust in. Maybe it's other people. And so he's saying basically, maybe Dostoevsky and Tolstoy don't have it right, but maybe Nietzsche doesn't have it right either. Maybe it's somehow being indispensable to people, serving others, that I can actually gain some meaning. And he draws a distinction between two kinds of people. Those that are spiritually married and those that are spiritually single. What does that mean? Well, spiritually married take life as they find it, take human nature as they find it. But the spiritually unmarried are continually seeking new systems that will control or counteract human nature. And so some people just say, yeah, human beings are what they are. We've got to live with it, we've got to do our best. You might say the American system of government was originally set up with that in mind. People are going to seek their own interests. They're going to group together into factions. They're going to seek their own good. What we have to do is have a system that provides checks and balances on these various factions. And that's one way to look at things. But then there's another more utopian line of thinking that says, no, we should design a better system. Seek a new system that will actually seek out, understand, control, counteract, and maybe even transform human nature. And so he begins playing with that idea, and then there's a long discourse on socialism with the businessman in the car. And really there, Amory Blaine is not very much committed to anything. He's trying things out. He argues with the businessman. All of those ideas are things that just sort of pop out of nowhere in terms of the rest of the novel. But they stem from this idea, well, maybe really what gives our life meaning is service to others. And then this passage near the end. This should remind you of the ending of Great Gatsby, by the way. It's very similarly written. As an endless stream that went on, the spirit of the past brooding over a new generation, the chosen youth from the muddled, unchastened world, still fed romantically on the mistakes and half-forgotten dreams of dead statesmen and poets. And so there's this dream that goes on. He sees himself as one of these chosen youth, a part of a new generation. And in describing that generation, here's the key passage. Here was the new generation shouting the old cries, learning the old creeds through a reverie of long days and nights, destined finally to go out into that dirty, gray turmoil, to follow love and pride. A new generation dedicated more than the last to the fear of poverty and the worship of success. Grown up to find all gods dead, all wars fought, all faiths in man shaken. So tell me what his vision of his generation is. What are they like?
Eager.
Say it again?
They're very eager and like go get it, but like
Yes.
in doing that and all their efforts, it's almost going to be futile because they will really accomplish that because like human nature will fundamentally change their elders. They're not particular, so they're going to just progress. They like strive for it so much they're almost like
Okay, good, good. They are eager to transform things. They are shouting these old cries, going out there, intending to make something of themselves and make something of this world, and yet they don't find anybody that they can actually rely on. All the gods are dead. All the wars are fought. All faiths in man. Well, they were wrong about all the wars fought, but that's the way it seemed after the Great War had ended. All faiths in man shaken. They don't find anything they can latch onto. Notice, more dedicated more than the less to the fear of poverty, the worship of success. So this is a materialistic generation. They're the heirs of progress. They are seeking after material prosperity, yes, but they're also looking for a broader meaning, and that's where they don't find much. As you say, it's as if human nature has changed. At any rate, the condition of society has changed enough that they're looking around for answers and they can't find. So it's like somebody coming in to the first day of the job without having any idea what to do. It's like, yes, I'm eager to do this. It's so great to have this job. Here I am. I'm ready to go. What do you want me to do? Okay? And here's the problem. Nobody's around to tell them. Or at least maybe the problem is they have 1,000 bosses and 1,000 people are telling them what to do. And they don't trust any of them. None of that makes any sense. And they're looking around saying, I'm eager to go do what I should be doing, and I have no idea what that is. And that's the problem they face. So yes, they're eager, but they're also looking for some kind of direction, and they're not finding it anywhere. All gods are dead, all wars fought, all faiths in man shaken. They know the old creeds, they've learned that, but none of it is something that they can really trust. And so it's as if they show up there, and there are hundreds of sets of directions, and they have no idea which one they're actually supposed to be following. The result of that is bound to be disillusionment. Imagine that you did get a job. You show up, and there's nobody there to tell you what to do. Or maybe a lot of people say, there's no boss. And you just ask coworkers, so what am I supposed to be doing? They all give you different answers. After a little while, you get pretty disillusioned, right? It's not really be a great place to be. And indeed, that's the way he ends up feeling. There was no God in his heart, he knew. His ideas were still in riot. There was ever the pain of memory, the regret for his lost youth. Yet the waters of disillusion had left a deposit on his soul. Responsibility and the love of life. The faint stirring of old ambitions and unrealized dreams. So you might think the person in that job situation, if they didn't have that, would just end up quitting. Or just saying, well, this is the kind of job where I guess I'll just do whatever I feel like doing. And they don't feel like that either. They have a sense of responsibility. They have a love of life. It's like, no, I really want to do this. And I have a sense that I better do it right. But what does that mean? And that's the uncertainty. That's the disillusion. They have no idea what it is to do it right. And so the very last line of the novel, we're left with this. I know myself, he cried, but that is all. Now tell me what that means.
know thyself comes from a place of program. And it's kind of like that idea of like knowing your internal world compass and like being able to like compare to these forms when they aren't really there. So you can really never know when you want to fit yourself. If you experience it as yourself, you can never experience life as anything else, no matter what you're trying to do. So no matter anything that happens, you'll plan.
Okay. Know thyself is an ancient command. It goes back to the dialogues of Plato and Socrates. It's there at the Oracle of Delphi. Know thyself. So it appears in a variety of different Greek writers in a variety of different times and contexts. And it's a basic thing. Know yourself. Well, there's an echo of that here. He says, okay, I do know myself, but that's all. And so it's weird. You would think, aha, this is the highest Greek ideal, and yet, you know, all right, I got that. Let's say I do know myself. Actually, the reader should doubt this. By the time I got to this, I was thinking, really, Avery, you know yourself? I mean, we've been reading this book too, you know, and it doesn't sound like you know yourself. But let's suppose we grant him that he knows himself. I think it is an interesting question. Is he deluding himself about that? Maybe he doesn't even know himself well enough to know whether he knows himself. But leave that question aside. Suppose he does know himself, but that is all. What is that? What is he lacking? what does he feel is missing? Something beyond himself. Let's go back to that Nietzsche versus Tolstoy or Dostoevsky paradigm. He says, look, the Nietzsche thing I've got down. Okay, I know myself. The problem is that doesn't really answer my question. In other words, he's rejecting that Nietzschean idea as I see it. I can imagine a reading of this novel where you say, no, this is his embrace of Nietzsche. That he knows himself, that's all, that's enough. That's not how I tend to read it. I think he knows himself, but feels that that's not enough. And so, in fact, it's a little bit of a criticism of that Greek ideal, a criticism of Nietzsche, saying that's not enough. But the problem is I don't know what the other part's supposed to be. Yeah?
Is it kind of like in the Art of War when Sue tells you that if you know yourself and the other person, you'll win all out battle, and you only know yourself to win 500 100. If you don't know either, you lose all 1,000. So, like, I'm really struggling because he's like only won 500. He's also lost 500, and by knowing the other, like, society was outside of who he wants to win an outlet.
Ooh, all right, that's beautiful. She's referring to one of my favorite works, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu is an ancient Chinese general, and he wrote this short book, The Art of War, that is actually still used in military training. In fact, before I think it was the first Iraq War, every Marine who was going to be involved in the fighting got a copy of The Art of War, and they were asked to read it. And there are a number of great tips on strategy there. By the way, not just for fighting wars, for life. I mean, when I was a philosophy department chairman for 10 years, that was the book that was my main guide, The Art of War. Let me say no more about those 10 years. But in any event, that's something that he does say at one point. The general who knows himself has a huge advantage, but it's not enough to know yourself. You've also got to know the other side. You've got to know what you're up against. And so the person who knows both sides will win all battles. The person who knows himself but not the other side, it'll be about 50-50. The person who knows neither is going to lose consistently. And that sense is in part what you might think is going on here. Okay, I know myself, that's half the battle. But now it's all that other stuff. It's the other side if you're in a context of war or conflict. But now, if you're not in a situation of conflict, in a way it's even worse. Your odds are worse than 50-50. Why? Because in war, it's typically you against the other person. In a game, it's usually you versus the other person. But life isn't like that. It's you and then thousands of other people, you might know. And so it's not like you're fighting one enemy. You're fighting things from all sorts of different directions. And so knowing yourself, that's a good thing. But what about everything else? And how do you fit all of that in? It's as if he's saying, look, I know the Nietzschean side. I know myself. It's not enough. I can't put faith in anybody in the way that Dostoevsky or Tolstoy does. What's left? What remains? That's the part I don't know. I don't know everything. The problem is I don't know what else is out there. All right, well, let's take a look now at the setting of this, because Fitzgerald's success was partly his brilliance as a novelist, partly the power of these stories, but partly also the fact that he managed to capture the mood of an entire generation. It was not just his own autobiography in that sense. He was really speaking for a generation, capturing a whole group of people who felt that they were in the same position, that all faiths were shaken, that all the gods were dead, that it was up to them to redefine values. But then it was an exciting time, that this range of immense possibility. We get to be the ones to redefine what this civilization is all about, but also the sense of loss, that we don't any longer quite know how to do it, that opens up the realm of tremendous creativity on our part, but it's also terrifying. And so he is part of, well, a very rapid cultural and economic recovery from World War I. It's something that actually is amazing. It didn't happen everywhere across the world at the same pace, but in the United States at least it did happen quickly. To show you. Notice the huge bounce down for World War I, but then also the rapid bounce back. So 16.5 million people died during the war, and then somewhere between 20 and 50 million died due to the Spanish flu epidemic. This huge collapse in life expectancies, but then within a very short time, it bounces back. And so the 1920s, which you might have thought would be a devastating decade due to recovery from the war, isn't really at all. Let's take a look at a number of components to this. One thing is that taxes dropped dramatically, at least in the United States. Take a look here at the income tax was something that for the first time took hold in 1913. The initial rates were there in that table. People with a net income of under $2,000 paid nothing at all. Somebody with a sort of middle income paid about 1%. The top rate was 7%. Then look at a few years later under Wilson, during World War I, 1918, someone who was poor paid 6%. The top rate was 77%. All of that happened within 5 years. It's an amazing transformation. Well, the 20s involved pulling that back a bit. So by 1925, let's say to 28, the top tax rate was 25%, and an average person paid perhaps 3%. And so there had been a tremendous run-up in taxes during the First World War, but tax rates dropped dramatically. That allowed people to have a lot more money for other purposes. Unemployment fell very rapidly from a recession after the war to under 5%. Throughout most of the 1920s, economic growth was rapid in not only the United States, but many developed countries. The stock market here in the US, well, did very well until 1929. And there were lots of other social changes. You see here people shopping at stores that now became pervasive. You see new styles and a sort of popular culture arising around leisure. By the way, those women have Herbert Hoover's head in temporary tattoos on their back. That was part of a political campaign. Here you see bathing beauties from the 20s. Here are more typical styles. Here is a group of college students pictured in typical college attire for the time. Yes, and here are people in a lab, in a chemistry class in college. There were tremendous social changes. Andre Siegfried, in a book called America Comes of Age, wrote about it this way. As a result of the revolutionary changes brought about by modern methods of production, the American people are now creating on a vast scale an entirely original social structure. What new methods of production? Well, mass production, really, factories. And so we see motor cars being produced and becoming inexpensive. Here's Calvin Coolidge pictured with one, with a very large horn on the side, notice. Airplanes, telephones, radio. All of these things made popular a new sort of culture. And look at these people enjoying their radios. That's the Supreme Court Chief Justice, shown listening to a radio with headphones. Here are a bunch of kids gathered around the radio, in a hospital, and so on. It transformed the culture pretty dramatically. Here you see a new shopping district, something that arises around this time. By the way, radio. What was the first radio station in the United States and when? KDK Pittsburgh, 1921. Okay? And by the way, it's one of the only stations that has a K thing that is east of the Mississippi River, just because of that historical fact. But they spread very, very quickly, so by the mid-20s even, there were radio stations all over the country. There were theaters showing movies with scenes like that. There were stars who became, well, and as you can see, a loosening of morals. That would not have been a poster prior to World War I. A fundamental change in people's attitudes about sexuality, about sort of what was permissible in society, about fashion, about all sorts of things. So here are various stars. Here are two stars being taught how to kiss in such a way that it will look like kissing for the camera. Reminds me of the Simpson episode where they talk about, showing, you can't use cows, you have to use horses if you want cows. What if you want horses? You just tape a bunch of cats together. Well, anyway, yes, we have the Marx Brothers. We have a variety of other comics who become famous at this time, and then a variety of other movie stars. Now, all of that changes things. There's a new classlessness in speech, in dress. People are able to travel around. Radio transforms things because they can hear broadcasts in standard English. And it fundamentally changes the way people speak. It means that people can go from one part of the country to the next and actually understand one another. That won't be transformed completely until television takes over, maybe 50 years later. But it starts here. Women start working outside the home. There's a spread of education. The literacy rate rises in the United States to 96%. And tremendous advances in literature, the arts, music. Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, Sinclair Lewis, Dostoevsky, Dreiser, Faulkner, Woolf, O'Neill, Wilder. In music, Isaiah Berlin, Kern, Gershwin, Copeland, and so on. And so you get this tremendous flowering of the arts, of literature, of music. You also, and here I have lots of pictures of jazz artists. And so just admire my jazz artist photographs. And the poet County Cullen, this is the time of the Harlem Renaissance. But now one other thing happens here, and I want to point this out before leaving the theme entirely. And that is just that at the same time all this is going on, there's an educated elite that begins to feel some distance from this popular culture that's being created. There's an educated, disillusioned group that's actually ambivalent about all these changes and ambivalent about America. Here is a good example of this. A New Englander who says, never forget that it's we New Yorkers and New Englanders who have the monopoly of whatever oxygen there is in the American continent. For the first time, people in that part of the country start looking down on the rest of the country as in some way uncivilized. And so you've got this East Coast cosmopolitanism that is in danger of becoming a counterculture. And as we'll see later, it indeed does become a counterculture.